Howdy folks, today's episode is pretty special because today's guest is not only a celebrity photographer who has shot the greats of Hollywood from Jack Nicholson to Samuel L. Jackson, Denzel Washington, Jackie Chan, Snoop Dogg and many others, but he's also an independent film director and producer with a brand new movie out that you photographers will love, love, love. And if you're wondering who I'm talking about, well, you'll find out right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of you viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. I mean, come on, people. You can really help me out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help me get even more amazing guests on the show. It's just one click. That's all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, celebrity photographer, producer, and the director of a brand new movie called Camera. Give it up for Mr. Jay Silverman. Jay, how's it going?
Thank you. It's going great.
Fantastic.
I'm grateful to be on your show, and I subscribed.
Oh, amazing. There you go. One more. Woo! It took a very, very, very long time to get to 1,000 subscribers for some reason. But there we are. It's only a small podcast. Anyway, I'm gonna jump right in and talk about your movie Camera because I've seen it 3 times already, and I love it. Give us sort of a helicopter view about the story of the movie.
The movie Camera this will be my 4th movie. So conceptually, I woke up one morning and the development person who works for me, who happens to be my producer, she goes out and looks for scripts. And we found this script called Camera. And just like being a photographer that I was for over 35 years, you search for material you can not only relate to, but you search for material that grabs your heart. And I'm at a stage in my life where I'm in my late 60s, and this is about giving back. So the movie Camera is very, very personal to me. And it's, it was done with a lot of love and a lot of commitment. But it was something that actually is very close to home. And it's a little story about a little boy who cannot speak. And no different than a photographer extrapolating his career with, mentorships and people that he looks up to emulate. I had those luxuries when I was a young high school photography student. And one of the most fulfilling parts of making this movie was my way of, in some significant way, giving back to the very people that helped me achieve the kind of fulfillment and success that I achieved. I've been doing it now for over 4 years.
I was going to ask you whether this movie has sort of a personal connection, because obviously it's a movie called Camera. It's really about photography, in a sense, or photography plays an important role in this movie. But it really is a movie about hope and belief and dedication. And it's also a movie about mentorship.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll address one aspect to your question. Number one, filmmakers just love to extrapolate storytelling, and you relate to it personally. I started to be a photographer or have ambitions when I was 15, watching my older brother go to high school and take great pictures. Not unlike the protagonist in this movie, I had trouble communicating. And for me, the camera became an incredible tool for me to be able to tell my story. Because because I was intimidated. And in many respects, the camera became my communication tool, not unlike Oscar in my movie. And with the luxury of having, because I know your audience is photographers, I was, lucky enough to grow up in Los Angeles, where my high school photography teacher was a kind of a celebrity on his own right. He was a photographer during World War II, and then he became, quite a successful photographer on his own, so much so that he would bring in Life magazine photographers that worked and got, epic attention in international publications, and they would come and talk about their photography. And I mean, when I think about it today in terms of enlightening, students, it was just extraordinary for me to have that kind of interaction with real professionals. And, many of them aren't alive anymore, but almost all of them are people you can Google, and actually see why they affected me. It is super important to me to share to other photographers why you go out and make a movie about a young boy that, number one, can't speak, and number two, is in a small little fishing town being bullied by, basically a community of people that are going through some pretty tough times. And how he sees things, not unlike my own growth as a filmmaker, a photographer, I became incredibly fulfilled by looking at something in a way that I think we all do as photographers that makes us special, versus walking in, and taking a picture of what you see versus maybe I can shoot an angle here. Maybe I can actually contradict who I'm photographing. And I was always impressed, like Yusuf Karsh, this legendary photographer from Canada, he came in one day to speak to our school. And I'll never forget his story about ripping a cigar out of Winston Churchill's mouth and, describing how that just shook up the whole room, but he got a brilliant picture. Or the same thing might go with, historic individuals like John F. Kennedy. And that always amused me because I feel that a photographer has an ability to come home with something that's special. And that's why people hire you. That's why people hired me. And it's very fulfilling to kind of surprise yourself, even though you do research before you do a job. In this particular case, the movie, I think, illustrates in a really kind of unique way how there's a whole group of human beings in the world that are over 60 that have so much to offer, that are sitting home watching TV, drinking a beer, and not being productive. And then there's just a few that are able to ignite youth and show them a little bit of what they're made of. And to me, that's kind of the foundation to the movie.
And I think that's a really great theme in the movie as well. It's this intergenerational cooperation almost, and both characters, the main protagonist, Oscar, played by Miguel Gabriel, that's it. Phenomenal actor. We'll talk about him in a second because his performance absolutely floored me, especially because he doesn't actually have any lines. What unbelievable talent. I hope he didn't get paid per line. But so you have a child actor who can't be any older than, I would say, 9, 10 maybe. And he basically acts through the whole movie without saying a single word, which purely from an acting performance is absolutely stellar. But then he's just as dependent on the other co-protagonist, Beau Bridges' character, Eric, as Eric, in a sense, is on him. And I find that sort of that codependency is a really interesting dynamic in this movie. And it's something, I think, as a message, I think it's really important because it's really something that, I think sometimes in everyday life, I have younger kids. I have 2 daughters and a son. And they are of an age where sometimes they don't really see that the necessity of that intergenerational collaboration. And so I thought that underlying message in this movie was absolutely fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah, it is. I've got 3 children myself. One of them found a mentor in culinary school. She's a chef, and the other 2 are still trying to find their way. But a father you can't do for your children what Eric did in the movie, because your children know you. They got your number. And what Eric's able to do is not only dive into his photographic background, but the wisdom as an adult, the wisdom of understanding, I suppose, the steps of trying to help the young boy with the challenges of having a widowed mother, a new community in a small little fishing village, in which he discovers that pretty much everybody in town is fighting their own demons. And it is not unlike a lot of communities around the world. The movie was written by an Irish writer by the name of Jamie Murphy, wrote this brilliant, touching story with an Irish theme, and we ended up spending a couple of years modifying it. It is really, really important to me that we find ourselves telling not only an interesting story about a community, but kind of something that's happening anywhere in the world. You could fly right now to Nova Scotia, which I did looking for locations in Canada, and they got major, major problems in fishing villages, which means, are they even going to exist in the next 10 years? Same thing in Boston with lobsters. Same thing in the town that I shot in, which was in Northern California. And what happens is you drop a little boy into that community and you see how he adjusts to the climate of people that are rude to him, people that judge him because he doesn't speak, people that judge his mother. And then, of course, you got young children that are bullies, and they don't just look at you with a weird look, that they actually are physically irresponsible. And these are real things that happen every day in across the globe. And I just thought, what a great story to show how the camera brings this community together and how it does so.
What you mentioned at the start of this is that every character in this movie really has its own demons to fight. And what happens in a sense is, and this is, again, is something that's not uncommon, is, everybody's preoccupied with their own problems. And the main character's problems are overlooked to a great degree. And that's when Beau Bridges' character comes in, and he's the only person able to see what that young boy needs at that moment, and discovers a talent as a photographer in this young boy. And the fact that he can speak actually becomes not an obstacle at all, at that point. And that's really again, it's a beautiful message in this movie.
Well, thank you. No, I'll tell you something. This young boy was so remarkable that too many people are giving me credit for his performance. Let me just say this. This young boy has a gift, to look in somebody's eyes and having Beau Bridges over his shoulder to capture the point of view of Beau. And Beau, generally reading the script and then kind of complimenting it with his own stuff. You begin to see his response, not just with his eyes, but his face. And you don't need words, and it is inspiring to know, because I'm a photographer my whole career, just like you. A photographer has the capability to capture in one image a story that has deeper meaning. And your ability as a buyer to that image, or a person taking the time to study that image, has that unique ability to be able to go, I could see this was a very intense moment. I can see there's something going on in her eyes. Is she pregnant? I could see that she is effervescent. These are things that a camera can capture in one frame. And to make a movie about a child that is that deeply imaginative with his camera, because I don't want to give away the story, but what he does with this camera is unique. He sees things through his own 9-year-old eyes. And what is so exciting is this young boy not only got the idea, but, possessed it and became that character. And it didn't hurt, by the way, Kirsten, that he was a child that grew up with a stutter. He was a child that grew up under a lot of doctors' cares with his voice because he was bullied. And, young children are intolerant to people that aren't, quote unquote, normal. He had some vocal challenges, and he doesn't now, but you wouldn't know that because he doesn't speak.
But it's, like I said, it was an incredible performance. Again, for a role where you don't speak, it's just it's unbelievable, and especially at that age, absolutely stellar. And then, of course, acting opposite, a Hollywood great like Beau Bridges must have been incredibly intimidating to start with.
It's interesting you asked that question because, Beau did something, and this is a great little short story to show you what kind of a human being Beau Bridges is. We've started casting this movie at the end of the pandemic. So predominantly it was all done via Zoom. And when we finally whittled down 600 kids to 10 or 12, we brought them in. And then when we finally chose Miguel, we decided to have a 3-some Zoom call. So I want to introduce you to Beau. And Beau had done something, because this is a story about, we're all only as good as our ability to be able to, A, collaborate, and B, be open to surprises, natural surprises. So Beau was living in Hawaii at the time, so he picks up a rock, and he shows the rock to the camera, and he goes, I picked this up for you, Miguel, as a gift. And he goes, you know what this rock is? This is a jasper rock. And he goes, it has powers, and this is a young 9-year-old he's talking to, powers like knights that fought dragons, and they used to engrave their swords with this rock. And anyways, long story short, that's adapted in the script because of Beau's creative contribution. And it just so happened that in the screenplay, the location of the movie takes place in Jasper. So it was not just a coincidence. It was like just a wonderful piece of soul that an elderly man could give a young child, a nugget, some kind of tool that he could hold on to and feel inspired. And that's exciting.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platyball tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. There's a third leading character in this movie that we haven't talked about yet. We'll talk about how you cast actors like Beau and like Miguel Gabriel. But there's a third character which I actually have with me, believe it or not, and that is, of course, the camera itself.
Look at that! You got the same one.
Well, yeah, this is the C330. So the protagonist in the movie is a C220 sister model, same sort of thing. But I know from experience how hard this thing is to shoot. That's incredibly difficult. I struggle with this. I'm still struggling with this. How easy or difficult was it to teach both Beau and Miguel how to handle this camera, or did Beau already have any experience with photography at all, or was this completely new to both of them?
For both of them, it was new, but and ironically, I've never used a Mamiya. I grew up using Hasselblad, but the screenwriter wanted a double lens reflex, and I embraced the idea that it was old school photography. I think that's really cool. My last movie all takes place in a small town where they make pencils. Okay, now pencil factories probably won't exist in the next 10 years in America. They're all made in Japan or China. In this movie, here you got a camera that pretty much, used to be a grand slam. Now it's just a wonderful little piece of machinery that a young child falls in love with. And I want to just make one comment. When the script was given to me on around page 3, the protagonist, this young little kid, is taking pictures in the beach. You see that in the opening of the movie. But what you see him do is he's scribbling with a pencil and lead on a piece of paper. And it's probably on page 18 that he meets Beau's character, Eric. And to me, this was a pivotal moment in the script, because as a photographer, to see a young, optimistic, impressionable child looking through the lens and pretending to take pictures and not actually using the camera because the camera doesn't work is so inspiring to me. It's no different than you taking your kids to a local department store and they sit in one of those pretend little cars and they're driving. Yeah. In his case, he was pretending to be a photographer. And that just hit me so close as a storyteller, because the fact that Beau's character had the capability to bring the three of them together, as you mentioned, the camera is the third protagonist.
This is an independent movie. How difficult was it to make that movie? Given that there are so many different, plates in motion at the same time, just for instance, finding the right location must have been tricky, because, when my first sort of impression is, it's a fishing village. You mentioned Nova Scotia. That would have been my first choice. How did you find Morro Bay in California in the end? Like, how did you end up in that location?
It's a great question. We went scouting. Number one, I wanted to shoot it in Ireland. Okay, who wouldn't?
Yeah.
The problem is really part of your answer to your question. When you make an independent film, and usually you make it in less than 18 days. This movie was made in 18 days.
Wow.
Which is extraordinary. You have to from a producer's hat, not a filmmaker's hat. You have to be realistic with a number of things that are vital. Number one, choosing a location isn't just about, it's perfect visually and all these components, but can I park the crew there? Can I get hotel rooms there? Is it going to be affordable? Is it going to be really expensive to fly all my talent there? At one point in time, you conclude that doing it in your own backyard, despite not having incentives, because Ireland had incentives, Nova Scotia had incentives. I ended up shooting the whole movie here in California, because if you take a calculator and figure out what it's going to cost to move recognizable celebrities, recognizable talent to a third location that is isolated, you find yourself in a totally unaffordable scenario. So we chose, and little did we know, and I'd been to Morro Bay many times, but it never occurred to me Morro Bay would have the charm that it ended up looking in the movie. What we did, though, since this is a photographer's kind of podcast, is we had to be inventive. And we ended up renting a backlot in Santa Clarita, California, which is about 45 minutes from little old Hollywood. And we took that old Western town that was used in the movie Thor, and we took 2 blocks and turned it into a fishing village. And as crazy as it sounds, you don't have traffic, you don't have ambulances, you don't have helicopters. It's isolated, and you can actually focus on getting the job done of making an independent film. You can just imagine trying to make an independent film in a real community. You got to stop traffic. You got to bring in mobile homes for dressing rooms. It's a major ordeal to make a small independent movie.
People often think, when I think of Hollywood movies, I think of like virtually, endless budgets and like Hollywood studios but of course, independent filmmaking is very different from that.
Everywhere you go, it's that old Annie Lee Woods moment where you go, where am I going to shoot? How am I going to best anticipate, the change of lighting in the room? Where am I going to put my own lights? How many people do I need to make this work? And so on and so forth. And before you know it, you've taken a circle and turned it into a square. In the independent film world of making a movie, it's the exact same discipline, because I know that I can make a fishing village in Santa Clarita of an old Thor Western town. But if I turn my camera this way 25%, I see weeds and hills and no water. And so, I have to be blunt. With AI and everything else, anything's possible. But when you're making an independent film, you got to be inventive. So you actually say to the DP, who happens to have done a miraculous job by the name of Andrew Jarek, this is a situation where, he went out of his way to get still camera lenses for the cinematographer. And you can see in the movie, and it's just gorgeous. And that is a collaborative aspect to what he and I did, to really jump into the creative aspect of this movie. But all that relates to, what is the palette going to be? How can I work in this community? Do I have enough ability to be able to hand hold the camera and follow? And sometimes we'd go like this and we'd run out of space. And, as you saw the movie, it's supposed to look like a very minimalistic, European kind of fishing village. And so you got to kind of stop yourself from I don't want it to be an AI movie. I don't make movies with a lot of special effects, but I'm very proud of what we did, because we took that mountain that you see in the real location and we moved it to the back lot for a couple of scenes, which essentially create continuity with the two worlds.
But I think there's a certain beauty in the sort of DIY aspect of all of that. You know, it's the same in photography, really, where, you know, people usually tend to see the end product, but they don't really realize that, like, a whole lot of it is jerry-rigged to some degree, you know. Like you know, if you could zoom out and you could see the actual set, you don't ever realize, you realize that there's a lot of gaffer tape and stuff's clamped to other things.
That's one of the most fulfilling things for me as a photographer that became a filmmaker, is the idea that we rented in Los Angeles an old Elks Club. I don't know if you know what an Elks Club is, but it's basically a community club that has a bar, and it has like a gymnasium. And in the gymnasium, we built all the interiors. And
Wow.
And so when you see the characters go to Beau Bridges' repair shop, you're looking at something that was built on a stage. And then when he opens the door, you're on the back lot, you know. And there's something really, I think, titillating about the fact that you don't even think twice about it. You totally believe it. And that's done every day in Hollywood movies. But, you know, when you're making an independent film, it requires a lot of panache. You know, believability is important. That's why a cinematographer and a DP like Andrew really took the task. And I mean, I don't think you can tell. I don't believe anybody can tell that one doesn't connect to the other. And I remember, you know, all my career, I'd have an opportunity to work with Michael Jackson I did a lot of work with Ray Charles, you know, and it's like, and I'm sure your viewers can understand this, about 99% of the stuff that's created can be created by any of you guys. It's the task is really one's ability to be able to take the job and get it completed without having, in my case, you know, Ray Charles walk out. Or we've got this much to do and we've got this much time to do it in. And you know, frankly, whether you're an architectural photographer or you're a wedding photographer or you're a photographer that shoots journalism, you know, your ability to choose the place, the time, you know, the lighting, you know, is the magic of what makes great work. That's why I love, you know, if you watch the TV show on Netflix called Ripley, you know, every scene is like, you know, just a piece of art. And I tried to do the same thing with our movie.
What are the main challenges for an independent movie as opposed to, let's say, like a fully blown studio production? Is it, you know, is it the actual creation process, or is it the, you know, the financing or the distribution? What are the biggest mountains to climb?
Well, financing and distribution might be the very greatest task, because these are very, very unique times right now. I thought they were bad when I made my last movie, which was released in 2020, right as the pandemic started. Now, with the strikes and everything that's going on in Hollywood, there is, you know, a real challenge, because filmmaking, especially independent filmmaking, really is, there's no liberties that have been given by the unions. Yeah, they offer a little help, but honestly, you know, they're kind of like obstacles, you know, in making movies. Yeah, again, I'll compare it to photography. It's no different than me going right now to shoot an assignment in New York City and having to get a permit and having to get insurance and having to make sure that, you know, no one parks at the place I want to create the scene. And incidentally, I made a living not shooting celebrities. I made a living doing advertising. So I was an advertising photographer. So, you know, I worked for Coca-Cola, Budweiser, Apple Computer. You know, that was my clientele. So, you know, there's no room for screwing up. You know, you got to get that location. You got to get that the time of day you chose. And you want to make sure, you know, that as many things don't go wrong. Well, when you're making an independent movie, it's the same challenges. It's just on a significantly greater level. But, it's funny. I was talking just yesterday to an actor's workshop, and they said to me, what was the number one thing that will never, ever, you want to give advice for people that want to make movies like you're making? And I said, it's very simple. As crazy as it sounds, when you cast your characters, whatever you do, especially if the protagonist is a child and he's in every scene, the one thing that you have to do, like unequivocally, is you got to meet the parents. Because without the parents being on your side, you got nothing. You got nothing. And again, as a photographer, my whole career, I can tell you where we've casted a young kid and he had the perfect look for the perfect scene, and that was it. Nothing more, nothing less. And the minute the client said, well, can you give me some variety? I'm going, you guys casted him, not me. You can't take a square and turn it into a circle. The kid can only deliver what he can deliver. And add on that, a helicopter mom, which is telling the kid what to do and contradicting what the photographer's telling them. Oh my God, it's chaos. So that would be one thing. But I've learned, this is my fourth movie, that what you don't want to do is ever make decisions independently. It's a collaborative medium. And I really have to say, having people that are as passionate or believe in the project is more important than anything.
That's exactly the reason why I love working in creative teams, where everybody has input, and the sum of it is always greater than, well, the end result is always greater than the sum of the individual parts. That's how I see it. When multiple brains creatively work on something, you can really come up, you can create something that actually goes beyond your sort of original vision. That's what I find typically. How difficult is it for an independent movie production to maintain, the crew required for a film like that? I'm thinking, the like budgetary restraints. Like how do you turn what's on the page into the final movie without making without giving up too much?
It's a really good question. My spontaneous response would be that hiring, even though I'm a producer, hiring people that are going to be the ones that are hiring the people, sound department, the crews, the PAs. I mean, I know this sounds cliche, but to me, they're all equally as important. And when you engage in trying to cut corners, I'll tell you the corners you never want to cut. The audio department, never try to save money there. The cinematographer, never. And your ability to be able to cast talent that want to be there and they're behind the project. I mean, my movie, Camera, I have to just share this with you. We get on a Zoom call with Beau for the very first time, and he says he wants to do the job, and he loved the script. And then he goes, do you guys have a minute? And I go, what's up? And he holds the script up, and he goes, I've got some notes. So he goes through literally an hour and a half each page of my script, and by the time we were done, we removed 6 pages, okay?
Wow.
And why am I telling you this? Because I wear my heart on my sleeve. I don't have any secrets. But what I experienced from, somebody like Beau Bridges is just the tenacity of being able to take the written word and step back and say, I don't need to say that. I can show you that. For example, the script might say, Mary Beth looks at her husband and says, you're a piece of shit. And guess what? I hate your guts. You're ruining my life. He'd probably rip that page out and says, I'll give you that look, all in a look. And he's right. And the level of life experiences are always going to make you more valuable than the next guy. And it applies in making movies. So if you have a cinematographer or you have a sound man that's going to say to you, that scene we just did, the sound was shit because of the helicopter that was flying over. He's pure gold, because he's going to go one of two things. He's going to ask me to do another take, or he's going to say, I'm going to do a little ADR after, when we're moving to the next shot, with the actors repeating the 3 lines that said. That's, you can't, those are people that have done it, failed, and learned from it. And I feel the same way, as a director that's made now 4 movies, I know where you don't want to cut corners. I know where you have to. Like as an example, you watch Netflix and you go, how in the devil did Peter Fincher get into, I'm making this up, but, the Vatican. And, or it wasn't it wasn't Fincher. Maybe it was. It was Ron Howard. But, you're not allowed to bring lights in there. You're not allowed to engage and bring heavy equipment in. But now with the advent of high-speed cameras and so on and so forth, you can shoot with natural light, Of course, picking the time of day to shoot is pretty important. But those things that I struggled with in the 80s, in the 90s, don't exist now, because you could shoot a movie right now in the space that I'm in. But what are the problems? The problems are it's 5 pages. 5 pages or 5 minutes on the screen. So by the time I get to the 3rd page, it's going to be dark in here. What do you do then? And that's the challenge that a good group of people that collaborate anticipate. Hence the reason why you bring in lights at the beginning of the shoot, so it retains a look through the whole 5 pages.
So I always thought, and I think I've sort of realized that may have been wrong, but I always thought, when you're doing an independent movie, it's got to be really difficult to get really good talent on board. Like, for instance, casting somebody like Beau Bridges, my first instinct would be like, why would he do an independent movie? I mean, he doesn't have to. He can just probably has, I don't know, X amount of Hollywood offers there. But then I thought, but here's the thing: if you're in an independent movie and you have you're working with some unexperienced actors, actually in the end, that's probably going to cost you more money, because it's going to take you a lot more time to get the same thing done. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you're bringing up. My first movie was called Girl on Edge, probably my best reviewed movie at the time. And it's about post-traumatic stress. And one of the leading actors is Peter Coyote. And Peter Coyote, is at the same level, in my opinion, as Beau is. These guys are, the best in the business. He's retired now. But, you don't tell Peter Coyote, can you give me a little more of the, he just delivers it on gold. But to answer your question, his daughter is a very committed psychologist that specializes in post-traumatic stress. So subsequently, he did the movie as a labor of love. He certainly didn't do it to make the kind of money that an independent movie pays. And honestly, and you're too young to know this, and I can't believe I even said that, but I'm making a generalization. You understand that there's an expression, you never know who you're sitting next to. The other day, I was at the airport, and I met this guy, and he's a producer. And I said, what do you produce? And he says, a radio show called Coast to Coast. And I said, oh, I've heard of that. That's the guy's, he talks about aliens. And every time I go on long trips in the middle of the night, he's on the radio. And I think his name is Peter Lorre, something like that. And I said, is that guy still alive? And he looks at me and he goes, he's sitting right next to you. And you see, the reason I bring that up is everybody, especially when we get older, we want to give back. And I got to tell you, and this is easy for me to say, but I know it's dicey, but I think this is Beau's best performance ever. He is so believable and so incredibly kind with his emotional energy that, it's kind of like making a movie with two lovers. If there's no chemistry there, you fail. And to your point, you wake up in the morning and you've casted somebody that, has a wonderful look, but she can't act. We all make those mistakes throughout our career. And I'm just telling you in a passionate way that what makes me do what I love is the fact that I want everybody to be there for the same purpose I'm there for. And that is to make a great movie. And to me, the most important thing is to get people to watch this movie. It isn't to make money, which in itself is a contradiction to commerce, so to speak.
As an independent, filmmaker, I'm guessing you're picking the script, you're sourcing the script, so you have full control over the storytelling aspect of it. What sort of stories do you find most compelling as a filmmaker?
To me, and I know you've seen Camera, the idea that you can sit in your living room or in a theater, obviously preferably in a theater, but in an environment where something grabs you, and touches a part of you. One of my films that kind of inspired this movie was Cinema Paradiso, which is a story about a young little child who takes a kindness to a cinema projectionist. And in that process, he becomes like a surrogate mentor. And it's just such a wonderful story because I can relate to it. That's kind of what happened to me. And to show that and sit in an audience, especially like I keep mentioning, you as a parent, you would love to have somebody in your children's life that offers a little of that sugar and kind of a compliment. And it's interesting. I'll tell you a great story. I was shooting Ray Charles when I was still making commercials, and I was wandering around my parking lot, and I have a studio in Hollywood with 3 stages, and we had spent a month preparing to shoot Ray Charles. What happened was I was in Dallas in D.C. shooting another job. In those days, this would be 9/11 time. In those days, you could freely travel with no concern for time and getting somewhere the next day. And the guy I was shooting by the name of Dick Vitale, which is a sports announcer, gets a migraine headache while we're shooting. So he says, we're done. And so I bring my crew. I'm a photographer. I bring my crew and we go back to Dulles Airport and we catch an earlier flight. My flight crashed into the field on 9/11. There were 3 planes that crashed. 2 crashed into the Twin Towers. 1 crashed into the field. And long story short, when I arrived in LA to shoot Ray Charles, he got stuck in Arizona. He has his own plane, so he did something pretty cool. He called up George Bush, and George Bush let him fly. There was a no-fly zone around the entire United States, and in exchange for playing in New Jersey, America the Beautiful, the following day. Little stuff like this is pretty extraordinary, right? So why we're making the commercial with a 50-piece orchestra and so forth, everything's gone, pretty solemn, pretty sad. He sings America the Beautiful. And of course, the whole crew is crying. And I'm shooting stills and photography and film. And while we're shooting, he gets a phone call. And who is it? It's the Pope. And the Pope wants him to fly to the Vatican. So, you see life stories like this. So now this is the best part of the story in respect to some people jump and some people don't. So I meet this guy at the front gate of my studio, and I say to him, he says to me, what are you doing there? I go, we're shooting Ray Charles. He goes, can I watch? I have an aspiration to be in the film business. And I said, sure, be here tomorrow morning at 7:00. We shoot the whole day at 3 different stages. And at the end of the day, I said, so what do you think? And the guy looks at me and he pauses and he says, it was a great experience, but he goes, I thought I was going to be able to work the camera. It's a true story. And he just went on his way. Now, I've mentioned this multiple times, but I mean, if I was in that boat, I would have been glue. I wouldn't have even have gone home. That's the way I was brought up. So we're all different people. Some people are going to jump to the occasion. And when you make independent films, jumping to an occasion is mandatory. Otherwise, you're going to go over budget. You're not going to be able to finish the movie. So many independent movies get stuck in post-production because they just run out of money.
Yeah, I think, it's the same with with large photography projects. I sometimes I get these sort of questions. How do you run a shoot like this and stuff? The answer to that question is always, it's all about solving problems. I'm actually more of a problem solver than anything else, because that's where I spend most of the time doing. Clicking the shutter button on the camera is over in no time at all. The lion's share of that production is actually solving one problem after the other to make it happen in the first place.
It's so profound what you just said. I remember this, and I share this experience when I was probably in my late 30s. I would say, if someone asked me what's the secret of my success, I would have said I learned very young to recreate and reinvent myself. That was mandatory, because as decades, I've been doing it since the 70s, 80s, 90s. You can't sit on your laurels, and you have to evolve as a creative guy. And I'll never forget, I hired a consultant, and I remember he was $500 an hour. And I said, I can't believe I spent $500 an hour. And he looked at me and he says, just give it a try. So we spent an hour talking. And at the end of the hour, he gave me an assignment. He said, Jay, I want you to tell me what you do that makes you special. Okay. And I thought about that. And then 2 weeks went by, and it was in my mind, I'm going, I got to drop another $500 to get that answer. You know what I mean? And he looked at me and so what have you come up with? And I go, well, I think, I have a way of working with people. I have a way of lighting. I have a way, you think of all that stuff. I'll come back in a week and you can tell me again. And the conclusion is, which person is already been stated by yourself, is we're problem solvers. That's what we are. That's all we are, is problem solvers. And if you think you are better than a problem solver, that's your issue. But to me, finding yourself, and again, I'm making a mention to how similar photography and film is. You want to tell a story, right? So how do you tell the story? You start looking at the overall concept, and you go, it's a little picture of a little boy that's trying to get a bucket of water, to his dog. And, I'm making that up. And so how am I going to tell that in one picture? I mean, that's a piece of cake for a photographer. But your ability to be able to stage it. I want to stage it in an old antique garage. No, I want to stage it at a gas station. I want to stage it in a field. It's subjective, I mean, there's no right or wrong. But whatever you choose to do requires you adapting and solving problems. And that's, to me, the exciting part.
And, the storytelling aspect is actually super important. Like, you mentioned the pandemic earlier. I don't know what it was like in California, but over here in the UK, the lockdowns were pretty drastic. I mean, it was draconian to the nth degree. So as a portrait photographer, of course, there weren't many portraits to be shot because you couldn't, you weren't really allowed to be in the same room with another human being. So what I did, and I got together with a friend of mine, and we decided to shoot cars because we realized we can shoot cars. Cars are, they're not breathing. They're not going to get infected by anything. So, we can go shoot cars. But of course, anybody can shoot a Ferrari, let's say. the difference is, what's the story? Well, the real question is, it's not how do you shoot a Ferrari. The real question is, what story are you trying to tell in that image? And so that really became sort of a quest throughout the best part of the pandemic, was that, to create a story context with that automotive imagery for us. And that was I find that was super fun. It was not something I've ever done before. I've never really shot cars before. But it became interesting because actually that car then just became the actor in that image, and the story that I managed to tell, or that I was attempting to tell anyway, with these images, was just really, it was kind of, I was just substituting the human, the human model for, or the car for the human model. And so it became a lot more interesting. And I think the images therefore became a lot more impactful, because of that. So it's that, it's that story element that for me always plays this sort of overriding role when it comes to photography in particular. And I'm guessing, coming from advertising photography, you could probably recognize that.
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, it's funny. I had an art director friend of mine, and he became a photographer, and what became his success at that moment was a hotel company called him, boutique hotel in LA, and they said, we want you to come here and shoot artwork for the walls. And he goes, here's what I want to do. He goes, I want access to four suites, and I will never show the number of the suite, but I will just shoot abstracts around each room. And he shot a crack in the ceiling. He shot the blinds, shades on the wall. It was just a very inventive look, because if somebody told you to shoot that Ferrari, I mean, my goodness, how many times has that Ferrari been shot before? 1 million times. So how can you make a different look, and that becomes the fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely. We were supposed to shoot this Ferrari for a client, and the original idea, actually, the basic idea was, okay, well, it's a luxury car. This was a car and driver type of portrait at one point, one of the shoots that we did. And so the basic idea was, okay, you have a luxury car, somebody very well suited and booted, in front of the car. We'll just shoot that. We'll light it really nicely, blah, 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 standard kind of thing. But the problem was, because it was still, the pandemic was still going on, we couldn't go and scout the location. So we had a location, but we couldn't go in person. So we had to get somebody to send us photographs of that location, which was the first mistake. And so what we got back was, photos of this location. It was an indoor location. It was like, it was a workshop, but it was all very clean and clinical. Clean concrete floor, concrete walls. So immediately you have this very specific idea of the kind of shot that I wanted to create. But then when we got to the location, I realized that what we'd been given were basically stills photographs of just one angle. Because as soon as you turned around, there were racks of old, dirty tools, tires. We found an old overall, covered in paint and dust and dirt, and it was all this stuff, all this crap, all this junk, that we couldn't see in the original photographs. And so immediately I thought, hang on a second, why don't we do something completely different here? Why don't we create some juxtaposition where we basically have this luxury car, but we build a set, all this junk, we build a set that looks like an old, dusty, rundown, dirty old garage, right? And we put this luxury car in there, and then we put the owner, instead of putting the owner into a designer suit, we put the owner into this old, screwed up overall, and then we can give him a jack, and we're going to make it look like he's jacking up this car, so that you create this real juxtaposition of this, where you look at the image and you kind of go, well, what is this luxury car doing in this junky old workshop? Where you basically create more context and more of a story around it, rather than just having, a standard portrait of a guy in a suit in front of an expensive car, which, but that was a direct result of just basically had we gone there, what I'm trying to say is like, had we been able to visit that location in person beforehand, had I been able to scout it out, I would have seen that immediately. But, just based on the photographs I got back.
Here's the wisdom to your brilliant idea is you'll never send a scout out again that you don't tell it to give you a 360.
Exactly. Absolutely. 100%.
No, because it takes a situation. I've had that happen to me more times than because to me, when you go to make a movie, you're not just looking for the said location. You want to know, can they accommodate the mobile homes? Can they accommodate the, as you say, a classic car? Can they accommodate dressing rooms? And you start adding all this stuff up. It's not a piece of cake, it requires a lot of moving parts. And I love what you just said because, sometimes the best stuff is stuff you have right in front of you and you don't even notice.
Absolutely. And luckily, we had a client, the owner of the car, who was willing to play along and just trust us enough to sort of deviate from the original, the original proposal. So, it's good for us. And the resulting image was really fun. It was really fun to do. It's a fun thing to shoot. How did you first move from photography into independent filmmaking? What was that journey like at the very beginning?
It's a great question for your audience because, number one, I think anybody that's in the photography business now knows it's, you probably, maybe I'm wrong, but to think that photography won't be merged with live action, I think you're foolish because everybody wants to, can you show me this side of that car you just described? What does the back of the car look like? I became, in Los Angeles, I was like a hybrid photographer. I started shooting big jobs, where I would be shooting Michael Jordan for Gatorade. And, they say, we only have 3 hours. Do you think you could shoot a couple commercials at the same time? And we're not talking these big elaborate commercials. We're talking about, close up of him talking and saying something. And it became not a financial thing for the client. It became a luxury because we only have 2 hours with Michael Jordan. How do we utilize that time the most efficiently and have an ability to walk away knowing we're going to get the job in the can? And so I did both, and I was good at it. And the celebrities always appreciated it because from their point of view, they're going to be able to go play golf, in 2 hours.
Yeah.
But I would spend just an inordinate amount of time making sure everything was perfect. So when they walked in, they stood on the X, the lighting was done, the sets were built, and the delays were, non-existent. It was just how to be as productive as I could be. And that became my hybrid stage in my career. And then I started shooting big commercials. And then, I would still shoot stills at the same time. Now, then all of a sudden I started going, well, I want to, work on storytelling, making my live action. I was lucky enough to have a TV show that I created called The Cleaner with Benjamin Bratt. That came out in the mid-2000s. And that was a life-changing experience because it was a big deal. It was my idea, but I didn't do the day-to-day. And but it was my show, and I was very fulfilled. And I saw how the wheels turn. And the one thing that I learned is I don't want to be in that business because it is so convoluted with corporate control. That's why I became an independent filmmaker, because the buck stops with me and starts with me. And, it's not like I got to make phone calls to get approval from 5 other people. I keep, even if I have investors in my movie, it's typically just one investor. So you become, I think more alert to the creative project versus how do I, get Paramount to agree to let a character do this. And it's always a fight, always a fight. That's why I think in part Netflix has been so successful as it became the company that didn't question your work, because directors would get opportunities to work with them with no restraints. That's unique versus somebody standing over you with a magnifying glass every move you make, questioning.
Netflix have been really interesting. I mean, the whole Netflix phenomenon, actually, to me, has been really super interesting, because I remember when Netflix first started producing their own shows. And I remember at the very beginning, and a lot of people, I think, thought, what is that going to be? How can, is it going to be a little bit crap? How is it going to compare to the big studios like Sony and Warner and all the rest of it? And interestingly, the exact opposite has happened. A lot of the content that was that's been homemade basically by the likes of Netflix, and actually Amazon too. Prime, Apple as well, has been some of the most creative TV that has been around, that has come out in decades. And I find it's really quite interesting to see that happening. I've always wondered why that was. What is it? Is it because they can hire the best writers? Is it because they allow more creative freedom? What's at the core of that?
And unfortunately, I have a mixed opinion about it, because my opinion is it's a very, very scientific stage we're in right now. Technology become the decision makers. We tried to sell my movie to Netflix, which to me is perfect medium for my movie. And they have a document they sent me with 6 categories. And I clicked every box except for the box that had a big, big, big star in it. And even though Beau's a name that's recognizable, they wanted somebody, that was, at an A level. And you just you can't make independent films with Bradley Cooper. You know what I mean? His friends will make them with him, but for someone like me to get Bradley Cooper would be impossible to make a $1.5 million movie. But I will say that the formula in which Netflix is working seems to be working, but it's an interesting way they make decisions.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, because it's, and of course that's the sort of dark side of the force, in a sense, is that, because of the fact that they are now producing their own content, they're now the gatekeepers for the content that is allowed on the platform, which has the potential to make matters a lot worse, actually.
I'll share this with you. We had a screening with 1,800 people in 2 screenings, totaling 1,800 people. We did a Q&A as they walked out. 92% said they gave it a 5 out of 5. And they all wrote a note. And I would say half of them wrote the note, why aren't there more movies like this on TV? Many movies that deal with the heart in a way that camera does. Now, you saw the movie, and there are not a lot of movies like this. And I wouldn't call it a Disney-esque, family film, because it's not. And I wouldn't call it a crime thriller. But there seems to be, a real need for movies that are kind of like the good old times, where you see just a wonderful little story, and it is not filled with visual effects. It's not filled with rock concerts, whatever it might be. It's just a great story, versus incest, versus, sexual theme. Look, I watch that stuff just like everybody else does. But to me, there's so much criminal stuff on Netflix, that relates to, discovering who did it, who's the murderer, who's the forensic. Those are appealing to their audience, and they just keep making more and more and more of them. But I don't make my movies because I'm trying to hit a box and fill it out. I make them from my heart. And that's hopefully what you enjoyed when you said you enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I absolutely love the movie. And it's really the story that I love the fact that it features a camera, it's about photography, and photography plays a big role in it. But I love the story, the interaction between the characters, the storyline itself. I have this thing in my head where I compare everything to Star Wars. Weirdly, like, I look at the storyline and I kind of go, okay, who is this character? Like, so for instance, you could say like, Oscar is Luke, for example. Beau Bridges, Eric is Obi-Wan Kenobi, for example. And so I have this sort of thing of like thinking like, okay, so who is this, in this storyline, who is this character? So I'm thinking like, I'm looking at Jessica Parker Kennedy, for example. She's, in a sense, she's kind of the Princess Leia character, but she's really the Padme character since she's the mother of Luke, in a sense. So she's either Aunt May or Padme. Couldn't make up my mind on that one. And then you've got Scott Tover's character Victor, who I thought was like, well, he's not the Darth Vader character actually. He is more like a Darth Maul. He's not quite the Darth Vader. I actually thought that Ross Partridge's character was the Darth Vader in the story, really. He's that split personality. He's actually good, but he's being drawn to the dark side. Sort of a thing. And that just left, the character Manny, which I sort of then thought, like, that must be then, by default, must be Chewbacca for some reason.
I want to just inject this. There's a renowned book. George Lucas used to talk about this. There's really only half dozen stories ever told.
That's right. Yes.
And every good story has a character like Yoda. Every great story. Yes. You can go to movies like Rings that Peter Jackson did. Just wonderful stories of life. And to me, you could probably do, and I'm flattered that you compared my movie to the characters in that movie, but you can't succeed at pulling certain strings unless you have those strings in your cast. And I think, sometimes you do it naturally. I think George Lucas studied. It was a book called, I think, the Clown of 1,000 Faces or something like that. I don't remember. Because they all have to pull from your heartstrings, even though, you might be fighting for this or fighting for that. It still all comes down to the human relationship between your son and the distance. And, I appreciate the compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. I highly recommend it. Whether you're into photography or not, which I'm guessing I would assume that the majority of people listening or watching this podcast would be into photography, because let's face it, why else would you watch it or listen to it? Doesn't make any sense. But it's a fantastic movie. I highly recommend it. Where can people see? When is it coming out? It's coming out shortly.
Camera is coming out on July 23rd. You can pre-order on Apple, I think, starting tomorrow, and it's available on Amazon, and it will be available on Zulu and all those other formats as well. It's going to do the typical streaming, but I think the most desirable place to go is Amazon, probably, because you will see the coming soon in that respect.
Fantastic. Jay, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. If you're out there and you're thinking about what to watch next, 23rd of July, make sure you watch Camera. You will not regret it. Take it from me. Jay, thank you so much for being the guest on the Camera Shake podcast this week. It was an absolute pleasure.
You're the best, Kirsten. And I got to say, what you're doing, whether it's, because we're going to get you more than 1,000 people when you post this. But I have to say that, I know the business model that you're in, and what you're doing is an extraordinary thing, giving back. And as you get older, you'll realize you're a form of inspiration for a lot of young people. And I thank you for that.
Thank you so much. With that, that was the most beautiful ending I've ever had on the show, for sure.
if you want to learn more about the movie, go to jsilvermanproductions.com.
And of course, all the links are going to be in the description below. So no matter whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast, you'll find all the links as per usual in the description. Okay, folks, that's it for today. It was awesome having Jay on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll love. Check out episode 203 with Pablo Giori, where we discuss experimental photography. It is super awesome. Now, if you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples for our guests' photography in full Technicolor? Well, you should by now because I keep mentioning it all the time. All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, well, just drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us to reach a wider audience all over the world. So thank you for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday. Make sure you mark that in your diaries and calendars or whatever you use. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.